Hey there, fabulous financiers. Welcome back to another juicy episode of the Do Different Better Show, where we talk about wealth, wisdom, and money moves, making finance simple for everyday people. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen, CEO and founder of Social Impact Now, Connective Institute, and managing director of the Integrated Capital Fund. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we're diving into another mythical topic that most people don't even know exists. It is the world of donor advised funds, or DAFs. We'll explore what they are, how they work, and the incredible benefits they offer for your charitable giving. So let's get started. But before we get into donor advised funds, let's really talk a little bit about what is philanthropy. Philanthropy is the act of giving money, time, or resources to help others and make a positive impact in the world. It's really an integral part of our society, and it's been around obviously for centuries, right? So I think that's important because there's different kinds of philanthropy. There's formal philanthropy and there's informal philanthropy. Informal philanthropy might be a tithing that you give at your place of worship, and informal might be, hey, I give to Goodwill. I take some of my old things and that are still useful and I donate them to Goodwill. Those are sort of informal ways of giving, or maybe you pack lunches at your local church. Those are all informal ways of giving. And then the more formal ways of giving are through some sort of charitable structure. And a donor advised fund is one type of charitable structure by which you can give out your philanthropic dollars. Another way is through creating your own foundation. Oftentimes, wealthy people, particularly wealthy families, will create a family foundation. Sometimes you hear about corporations. Your favorite companies like Target. Target has a corporate foundation by which they take a percentage of their sales and they put that money to work as charitable dollars or charity to local communities where there are Target stores, right? So, with all of that being said, let's now get back to donor advised funds. Donor advised funds. These are charitable giving accounts that allow individuals or families to make charitable donations or charitable gifts and recommend grants from these funds to their favorite charities. Think of it as a personal charitable savings account that you can use to support the causes that you care about. So, here are some features and benefits of a donor advised fund. One major benefit of a DAF is the immediate tax deduction for contributions made into the fund. This means that when you contribute to your DAF, you can deduct the full amount of what you put into the DAF. So, understanding why, that could be really, really valuable to you because let's say you want to put in $5,000 into a DAF, you actually get the full tax deductible benefit of that $5,000 gift today. It doesn't have to be spent when you put it in. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, right? But really, the biggest thing that I want you to understand, it's like being your own mini foundation without any of the administrative burden or cost of running a foundation, right? You don't need staff, you don't need any of those things. You are giving out your money from, like I said, this savings account, right? So now that we kind of have an overview of DAFs, let me give you a little bit of the history of DAFs. DAFs have been around for decades. They've gained a lot of popularity in recent years due to their flexibility and tax advantages. They originated as a way for community foundations to help donors manage their charitable giving more effectively, right? As a person, maybe you're working, maybe you take your annual bonus check and you put that into a donor advised fund. You don't necessarily have all the time to go and find all the charities that you might want to give it to you. And so working with a community foundation or some other trusted organization, they will do all of that for you. They'll do some of the vetting for you, or you can make specific recommendations of saying, hey, I would like to give money to Connect Up Institute. They will do all of that administrative work for you, and you don't have to worry about anything. But here are some statistics, just a little bit of about the growth of donor advised funds. So according to the National Philanthropic Trust, DAFs have been a steady increase in contributions and grants and the number of accounts year over year. In 2020, contributions to DAFs totaled $47 billion, and grants from DAFs to charities exceeded $25 billion. So, um, DAFs now account for 10% of all individual giving in United States, right? So, how do DAFs work? DAFs are, there's basically a fairly simple process. You set up a DAF at what's called a sponsoring organization. Typically, this might be a community foundation or an asset management firm like a Vanguard Charitable or JP Morgan Chase, and there's many others. These are not the only two. What you do is you contribute your assets like cash or stocks or real estate, and then and then those assets are invested and allowed to grow tax free, right? As that money is growing, you then can recommend grants from the fund to qualified charitable organizations. So these are typically what are called 501c3s or not registered nonprofits. You will then work with an advisor that works at the organization, who they're employed by the organization to help execute getting those grants out the door on your behalf. So remember, I've always told you to understand how any money manager gets paid, whether it's a charitable money manager or it's an investment money manager. Always understand how people get paid, right? This includes charitable organizations. Charitable organizations can generate revenue from hosting donor advised funds in a number of ways. The first is through administrative fees. So that is one of the primary ways that charitable organizations like a foundation, like a community foundation, makes money from hosting DAFs. It's through their administrative fees. These fees are charged to cover the costs associated with managing these dollars on your behalf, such as processing contributions, managing the investments, and administering the grants. So kind of think of them, they're like your employees if you were to open a large foundation, but you don't have any of that expense, right? So typically it's a percentage of the fund's assets. So it can range anywhere from 0.5% to a full percent annually. So for example, if you had a DAF that had $1 million of assets, right? You, whatever those assets are, could be cash, could be real estate, could be whatever. For the sake of this conversation, let's say it's $1 million cash. There will be a 1% fee, which would generate $10,000 per year for the host organization, right? So you'll hear me say charitable organization or host organization interchangeably. I'm talking about the organization where the DAF will sit, where it lives, where it's being hosted on your behalf, right? There's also sometimes transaction fees. So some DAFs sponsors may charge an additional fee for specific transactions, such as recommending grants or processing complex asset contributions, right? Number two, another way that they make money is through investment management fees. In addition to the admin fees, DAF sponsors often charge an investment management fee. These fees cover the cost of managing and investing the assets held in the DAF, no matter if it's cash, no matter if it's real estate, no matter if it's stocks. They are charging you to take care of it, right? They're watching your egg. So management fees are typically a percentage of the assets under management, AUM. We talked about that in another show, similar to a mutual fund or an ETF, right? For example, if the investment management fee is 0.25% or 0.25, and the DAF is $1 million, once again, well, for this example, we're going to say $1 million in cash. This would generate $2,500 annually for the host organization. There are also sometimes performance fees. In some cases, DAF sponsors may also earn a performance fee if the investments exceed a certain benchmark or goal, right? Three, the third way that they may receive revenue from your hosting your DAF is through service fees. DAF sponsors may offer additional services that come with their own fees, such as philanthropic advisory services or personalized grant making support. Philanthropic advisory services are tailored to advise donors on how to maximize the impact of their charitable giving. These services can often be done at a hourly or flat rate, an hourly rate or a flat rate. Grant making support is services that assist donors with identifying, vetting, and making grants to charitable organizations. And that is another way that they can generate additional income. So or revenue. So let's say you don't know who your charities that you want to give to. They can help you discern that. But if you're coming with your own charities, you're like, hey, I would like to give to the Animal Rescue Society. Okay, that's a pretty straightforward one. They may or may not charge you for any sort of grant making support or other performance fees related to that. The fourth way that host organizations can make money from hosting your DAF is through investment and interest income. The assets in the DAFs are invested, and the investment income, meaning interest, dividends, or capital gains generated by those investments, can contribute to the overall financial health of the sponsoring organization. So they get the benefit of some of those dollars, right? Interest and dividends. So as it relates to interest and dividends, the income earned from bonds or dividend paying stocks or other interest generating investments can help cover their operational costs of managing and supporting your DAF or their entire DAF program, right? And then finally, capital gains. So if the investments appreciate in value, the realized capital gains can also support the charitable organization's activities, right? So a lot of times with the community foundations, they're not only helping you make your choices and administer your grants, they are also a grant making institution and are generating their own grants as well, as those grants that are being done as part of the donor, all of their portfolio of donor advised funds, right? So 5, another thing is it allows them to increase donor engagement. So by hosting donor advised funds, charitable organizations or host organizations can deepen their relationships with donors, which can then lead to an increase in donations. Donors who are satisfied with their DAF experience may be more likely to make additional contributions to their DAF or directly to the host organization that are separate from the DAF. Also, there could be an opportunity for legacy gifts. Donors might be inclined to include the charitable organization or host organization in their estate plans, then leading to significant gifts in the future. So, for example, let's say that a community foundation hosts a donor advised fund, once again, using our same example of $1 million in cash. The foundation charges 0.75% or 0.75 annual administrative fee and a 0.25 investment management fee. So this is how that might look. On $1 million at 0.75%, that would give them $7,500 in just administrative fees. The investment management fee on $1 million at 0.225 or 0.25% would be $2,500, meaning that their total revenue for managing that specific donor advised fund would be $7,500 in admin fees, $2,500 in investment fees, which would then equal $10,000 a year. So if they're hosting 100 or hundreds of donor advised funds, you can see that $10,000, and that's only with $1 million, right? There might be funds that have more, there might be funds that have less, but just say if there are multi-million if they're hosting millions of dollars, think about $10,000 a year times hundreds of donor advised funds. That in and of itself could turn into hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million, that now is revenue for the host organization. So charitable organizations benefit from hosting donor advised funds through a combination of an admin fees, investment fees, and additional service fees, and the potential for increased donor engagement. These revenue streams help cover the costs of managing funds and support the organization's broader mission, right? So this is why it's always important to understand why people would want to do this for you. What is their motivation? And so I want to explain to you, this is a really great opportunity. Donor advised funds are amazing, but it's important for you to understand some of the fees that are involved. Now, quickly, in the last remaining minutes of this segment, I want to talk about what are the benefits of a donor advised fund. There are lots of really great benefits of having a donor advised fund. So I really want you to understand what those are. Number one is immediate tax deduction. One of the most significant benefits of a donor advised fund is the immediate tax deduction you receive in that particular tax year. This can be advantageous, particularly for high income earners looking to reduce their taxable income in a given year. So, for example, if you gave $10,000 to a DAP, you can deduct that from your taxable income and potentially save you thousands of dollars in taxes. The next part is tax-free growth. Once your assets are in the DAP, they can be invested and grow tax-free. This means more money is available for charitable grants over time. You don't get that money back, so just be clear about that. So, for example, if you put in $10,000 and it grows to $12,000, you now have $12,000 to grant to charities, and you won't owe any taxes on that growth. Next is comparing tax benefits. So DAFs offer great flexibility and immediate tax benefit compared to direct giving or setting up a private foundation, right? For example, unlike a private foundation, a donor advised fund doesn't require annual distributions and there's no excise tax on the investment income, right? Two, another benefit of donor advised funds is that you can make grants over time. DAFs allow you to recommend grants to your favorite charities at your own pace. It gives you time to research and choose these causes that matter to you. So, for example, you might decide to support a local food bank this year and a scholarship fund next year. You don't even have to give out the grant in the same year that you made the contribution to the donor advised fund. So let's say you put in $10,000 this year, you can not make your first grant until the following year. That is all going to depend on the circumstances and the agreement that you have with the host organization. So you'll definitely want to check that out. The next thing is investing in DAFs as an asset. So another advantage is the ability to invest in DAF assets, which grow over time, increasing the available amount of grants. So many DAF providers offer a range of investment options to align with your risk tolerance and your risk goals. And then finally, it's just strategic philanthropy. DAFs enable you to take a very strategic approach to philanthropy, aligning your charitable giving with your values and long-term goals. So, for example, you can create a giving plan that includes supporting educational initiatives, healthcare initiatives, small business initiatives, and environmental causes over a number of several years, right? So, finally, to wrap up this segment, we've covered donor advised funds, what they are, how they work, and the incredible benefits that they offer for your charitable giving. So here's my call to action. Take some time this week to explore setting up a donor advised fund. You can go online and check things out. There are lots of organizations locally, particularly if you live in a metropolitan area, and you can consider how a DAF might fit into your financial or charitable plans. Reach out to a local community foundation and ask that host organization, or you can ask where your 401k sits. A lot of times, the place where your 401k sits, they will often have a charitable arm of their organization where you can have a DAF hosted. So check these out, see where you come up with, and see if it seems like it might be something that's for you. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Elaine Rasmussen. I'm your host on the Do Different Better show. And in the next segment, we're going to dive into some practical tips for setting up your donor advised fund. So don't go anywhere. There's plenty to come on the Do Different Better show. Welcome back to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. And in this segment, we're going to get practical and tactical. We're going to walk through the steps to set up your donor advised fund, manage it effectively, and make impactful grants. Ready to dive in? Let's go. So the first step to leveraging your donor advised fund is actually to set it up. So the first thing that you need to do is to choose a sponsoring organization. You really want to think about selecting the right sponsoring organization or host organization for your donor advised funds. There are three main types. The first are community foundations, which we talked about in the first segment, national charities, and financial institutions. So first, let's talk about community foundations. These are local organizations that support community giving in a very specific community or region. So, for example, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and they are a popular choice for the tech philanthropists in the Bay Area. Here in Minnesota, we have the Minneapolis Foundation, we have the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation. Not all community foundations necessarily will say community foundation. Typically, you'll know that they're a community foundation is one to go on their website and it will specifically say that they're a community foundation, or they will be named a particular place. So, as I mentioned, Minneapolis Foundation, you know that it's a community foundation because it says Minneapolis. It's giving you a specific city or locale, or it could be that a specific sector of the, could be the Food Community Foundation, but that they're telling you that they have a very specific scope in what they do. But geography is typically the marker of these community foundations. They're done by geography, right? So you definitely want to look it up. You can just say my local community foundation in Google, and see where are the community foundations that are closest to you. Then there are national charities such as Fidelity Charitable, there's Schwab Charitable, and Vanguard Charitable. They often offer donor advised services nationwide. Once again, many of the large investing companies share arm, and that is where the donor advised funds typically may be hosted. They often provide online tools and resources to help you manage your donor advised fund very easily. You don't even need it. Once you get it set up, you don't even need to talk to a person. You can do it all yourself, or you can have one of their folks that are on their team help you manage that and execute on any grant that you're looking to make. But Fidelity Charitable is probably one of the largest donor advised sponsors in the United States, and they offer a wide variety of investment options. Next is financial institutions. So many financial institutions like banks and investment firms also offer DAFs as part of their wealth management services. So, for example, Bank of America offers a DAF program that integrates their clients' overall financial planning, right? And once again, if you're working with a wealth advisor, they will be able to tell you if they offer these services. You can ask them if it hasn't come up in previous conversations, do you offer donor advised fund services? And they will tell you yes or no. And you can learn more about what are the scope and scale of what they offer, right? And here are some things that you want to think about considering. Look at the administrative fees charged by the sponsoring organization. We talked about that in the previous segment. They typically range from 0.5% to 1% of the assets that they're managing. So once again, if it's $1 million, you can do the math, right? So and then also look at what are the investment options, right? Check the variety of investment options available at your donor advised fund host organization. What are the support services that they offer? So consider the level of support and additional services offered, such as philanthropic advising. If you're new to philanthropy and I don't know how to pick a charity to give to. I'm not sure what kind of charities I should be giving to. I'm not sure how much I should be giving. Then you might want to leverage the support services, their philanthropic support advising services, right? So here's an example. Comparing the service fees of a Fidelity Charitable and Schwab Charitable and the local community foundation can help you decide which is the best fit for you, right? So next, number 2, opening and funding the account. So once you've chosen the sponsoring organization, the next step is to open your DAF, open the fund of your DAF. So usually there's an application process or an application form that's provided by the sponsoring or host organization. They'll ask you some basic information like your name, your contact details, but also they're going to ask you how much do you want to put into the fund? It's very similar to opening a bank account or a brokerage account. Very similar questions. You'll probably, if you're doing this online, you'll have some security questions. So you want to be mindful of what kinds of security, what are going to be your answers to your security questions, ones that you can easily remember. Next, you want to think about what are the types of assets you want to contribute. You can contribute a variety of assets to your donor advised fund. So we talked about cash, stocks, mutual funds, real estate, or even privately held business interests. If you hold an interest in a company, you can put the value of that in the donor advised fund. So for example, you can contributing appreciated stock allows you to avoid capital gains taxes and receive a charitable deduction for the full market value. So let's say you have a stock, you've got Apple stock, it appreciated $100 a share. Normally, you would have to pay capital gains on the difference between what you bought it at and the now increase in the price. Well, if you give that stock as part of your asset into your donor advised fund, you'd be able to get the full market value, meaning the full price of it, and you don't have to pay capital gains. But also, that no longer belongs to you. It is for a charitable purpose. So understand it no longer belongs to you once you put it into donor advised fund. It belongs to you in the sense that you get to manage it and you get to dictate what happens to it, but you cannot benefit. It does not come back to you. So it's a really important thing to understand. Next is some practical tips for funding. So one, think about the timing of your contributions to maximize the tax benefit. So such as donating before year end to claim the deduction for that particular tax year. Also think about what assets you're selecting. So choose an asset that you have that as appreciated in value to take full advantage of the tax benefits. So just to give you an example, funding your donor advised fund with appreciated securities or stocks and bonds instead of cash can significantly enhance your tax savings, right? Because the security is going to go off of the face value. Whereas if you put in cash, cash only has the actual hard value of what it is. $10,000 is $10,000. However, if you have $10,000 of stocks and the stock appreciated to $12,000, you now have $12,000 that is the corpus of your donor advised fund. So I know that might be a little confusing, especially if this language is new to you, but it's just to understand that the face value of cash versus the appreciated value of any particular stock or bond or asset that you put in, that's going to be the difference of what the total value of grants that you can give out with your donor advised fund, right? So now we're going to move to managing and granting from a donor advised fund. So you've already set up your fund, you've funded your fund. It's now time to manage the investments and start making grants to your favorite charities, right? So the first thing is, what are your investment options? One of the key benefits of a donor advised fund is the ability to invest in assets that grow over time. So let's look at the investment options available. So here's an overview. Most sponsoring organizations offer a range of options from conservative to aggressive portfolios. So, and we've talked about what that means, right? From money market accounts, venture fund accounts, all kinds of things, right? So go back to one of the previous episodes to hear what does conservative to aggressive portfolio design look like, right? Then you want to think about aligning your investments with your charitable goals. So if it's important to choose investments that align with your risk tolerance and charitable goals, that's super, super important. So for example, a conservative investor might choose a bond fund to preserve capital, while an aggressive investor might opt for an equity fund, which is investing in the stock market for higher growth potential. And so go back to our show talking about equity investments versus bond investments and the difference between those two conversations, right? Then you want to actually grow the fund. By investing the assets, you can potentially increase the amount available for grants, making a greater impact over time. So for example, if your donor advised assets grow by 5% every year, you'll have more money to support your favorite causes, right? But once again, you never have to give out the full value of your donor advised fund at any given moment, right? That's also the difference between if you opened a foundation, you have a mandated spend every year, and the minimum by the IRS is 5%. So if you have $1 million that you have as a private foundation that you've opened or a family foundation, you are mandated by the IRS to give out a minimum of 5% every year. That's the minimum. With your donor advised fund, you are absolved of that 5% requirement. You can give out more, you can give out less, you can skip a year, but you receive the tax benefit in the year that you put in the money into the fund. So just understand how all of those, it's a little bit of a mind Jenga that you want to be thinking about, right? So number 2, let's talk about making grants from your donor advised fund. And this is the exciting part, giving out money. And what's more fun than that? So the thing that you want to think about is how to process and the process of recommending grants for your donor advised fund. So once again, most donor advised fund providers have an online platform where you can log in and make recommendations to IRS qualified public charities. Typically, these are charities that have a 501c3 status. That is a tax code status, 501c3. There's 501c, there's 501ds, there's 501es, and there's different rules, but by and large, 501c3s. Those are IRS qualified charitable public charities. And at this point, you can specify the amount, you can specify the purpose, and you can specify the timing of the grants on the platform. So here are some tips for effective, impactful grant making if you're not going to use the philanthropic services of the host organization. Do your research. Take the time to research the charity you want to support, and make sure that they align with your goals and values, and also look at them to see, are they doing the work that they say that they're doing, right? I find as somebody who's a recovering development officer, all too often people don't really look to see and find out, is the organization actually doing the work that they say that they're doing? I'm not saying that the organization is fraudulent, but sometimes organizations will use practices in doing their work that no longer work, right? But they're doing it because they have a grant that tells them that they're getting money to do this work in the same way that may not be relevant or meaningful, right? So just wanting to see, where is their alignment with intent and impact, right? Another tip is make your giving regular, right? So consider setting up recurring grants. This is a very beneficial thing for organizations to know where their money is coming from. Very similar to you wanting to make sure that your paycheck gets into your bank account every pay period. Nonprofit organizations need to know where their funds are coming from so they can plan well and to do the work, and that they don't wake up one day and be like, oh, there's no grant this year, we're going to have to cut our program by 30%. So by setting up recurring grants or setting up multi-year grants is a great way to support the charities that you love and helping them become very sustainable and continue the work that they're doing, right? So here's just a quick success story. I have a friend of mine, her name's Maria. She opened up her own donor advised fund. She wanted to support educational initiatives in her community. And so by strategically investing her donor advised assets, she was able to support small business entrepreneurs, really learn how to get into to manage their finances for their business for dozens of founders on the east side of St. Paul over a number of years. And that made such a considerable impact in the economic growth of the east side community. So, but there are some pitfalls that I want you to be aware of. One common pitfall is not fully understanding the fees associated with the donor advised fund or the hosting organization, or failing to regularly review and adjust your investment strategy into the donor advised fund or your grant making. So to avoid this mistake of leaving your donor advised funds, for example, avoid the mistake of leaving your donor advised funds in a low interest money market account if your goal is long-term growth. If being aware of how much money you have to give each year, maybe you might want to set a ceiling and maybe a floor of like, I want to make sure I give out no less than $2,000, but no more than $25,000 every year, right? So these are kinds of things that you want to think about. And if you have a good advisor, they're going to ask you these questions. But once again, you shouldn't rely on somebody else. You should really think about these questions yourself. And even if you're just thinking about them, you may not have an answer, but continue to have a conversation with yourself about these things. Maybe do it with your partner. I definitely encourage getting family involved in these conversations, particularly children, so that they start to understand and get this as a practice of how they might want to think about managing their philanthropic energies or their philanthropic giving. So that's it for segment 2. We've covered how to set up a donor advised fund, manage it effectively, and make impactful grants. And so here's my call to action to you. If you haven't already, take the first step by researching some donor advised providers in your community and consider how a donor advised fund can fit into your financial and charitable plans. Thanks for tuning in. In this next segment, we're going to explore how to maximize the impact of your donor advised fund through strategic philanthropy and long-term planning. So don't go anywhere. There's plenty of more to come when I show you how to do different better. Welcome back to the Do Different Better show. I'm your host, Elaine Rasmussen. And in this final segment, we're going to explore how to maximize the impact of your donor advised fund. We're going to discuss strategic philanthropy, long-term planning, and some practical tips to ensure your charitable giving makes a lasting impact. So let's get started. To truly make an impact with your donor advised fund, it's important to think strategically and plan for the long term. And here's how you do that. Number one, create a charitable giving plan. A well thought out plan helps you align your donations with your values and your goals, ensuring that your contributions make the greatest impact possible. So, here are some steps to creating a giving plan. And we've talked about this in, like, I think episode 2 or 3 of thinking about your values, right? Identify your values. Start by really thinking about what are the things that are important to you? What are the things that have been impacted you? What are the things that you wish you had that you didn't necessarily have access to? So, for example, maybe you're really passionate about Montessori education. Maybe you are very concerned about reproductive rights of women living in rural communities. Maybe you're really concerned with social justice or environmental conservation. Whatever those are, pick one or two things. And the reason why I say one or two, it can get really overwhelming to start building a whole long list and then trying to maintain all those charities. I remember my mother-in-law, as we were getting to the end of her life, she had 60 charities that she was giving to. And we were like, you can't give to all these charities. It doesn't make sense, right? From a practical standpoint. And actually, it's not good for the nonprofits to continue to get these small checks as opposed to supporting one or two organizations in a big way. That is actually more helpful and more meaningful to the organization. It might feel good to write 60 checks, but it's actually not actually to the long-term sustainability of the charities that you actually care about. You're not setting them up for success. So two, set up your goal. Define what you want to achieve with this giving. These can be specific or measurable goals, such as if you're funding scholarships for underserved students or supporting medical research. Aim to fund a specific number for a specific number of people for a specific type of need, right? Thinking, getting more clear about that helps you decide on the charities because of how their work is set up is aligned with what you're thinking of giving. That doesn't mean that there isn't room for modification or changes. You learn more about the field that you are supporting through your charity, but you want to start somewhere to know whether or not you're making any movement and you're making the impact that you want to have. Next is you want to research these charities. So take the time to research and vet the charities that align with your values and your goals, similar to a job. And there's some great resources online like Charity Navigator or GuideStar, which I think now is called Candid, CANDID. And you can research what are called 990s. So while we as individuals, we file 1040 tax returns, nonprofits file 990s. So in GuideStar or Candid, you can go and look up 990s for charitable organizations and see, are they financially healthy, right? And if you're not sure how to read one, we'll probably do a show on that. Let me know if that would be of something of interest to you. And then what you want to do is you want to plan your contribution. So decide how much you want to contribute each year. Like I said, we talked about providing a floor and a ceiling of what you might want to think about giving. So, for example, you might want to allocate $10,000 annually to maybe one or two different charities with specific amounts earmarked for each cause. Or you might say, I'm going to give this charity $10,000 every single year. Whatever that is, once again, it's a good idea to write it down, not only for your donor advisor and the host organization, but for yourself. So you can look back over time and be like, oh, this is the trajectory that I've executed. Do I want to make modifications? Does this still feel good? Is it still meaningful and relevant considering the external circumstances of the environment, whether it be financial forces, environmental forces, whatever that may be? So I'll give you an example of my personal strategic giving plan. I have a personal goal of moving 50 billion, yes, billion with a B, to rural and communities of color. why that's so important to me. And while I may not be moving all $50 million, my intention is to be in places and spaces where I'm moving money that move money to those communities. I'm a big supporter of rural communities. I'm a big supporter of communities of color. So the work that I do is all with the intention of moving money to those communities. So I have my own personal giving plan. I have my own personal investment plan, but I also want to leverage other people, places, and spaces to move money as well. So that's just my own, give you an example of what that could look like, of having something very defined and clear. And I have some other sort of subsets of what that means, as far as what are the areas that that looks at. I'm looking at small business entrepreneurship. I'm looking at financial empowerment, financial education, wealth education, obviously, because of this show. So all of that with the interest of moving money to rural and communities of color, right? So that's something you want to think about. And if that, hopefully that example is helpful for you. Number two, another way for you to do is engaging your family in your philanthropy. Having conversations is a very rewarding way to instill your values and generosity and social responsibility for future generations, particularly with grandchildren. I was just sharing with a friend of mine the other day. One of the things I used to do with my son, his birthday is in December, and Christmas is in December. And so one of the things that I would tell him to do is he could only keep enough toys that would fit in an 18-gallon bin. And so what that required every year was to take everything out, figure out what he wanted to keep, figure out what he wanted to give away, to donate, and figure out what was trash. Because I would tell him, we don't give our trash to someone else. And then when we gathered all the things that he wanted to donate, I would take him someplace to go and donate it himself. So whether that be a women's shelter, whether that be a children's hospital, he got to see how it impacted somebody else when he gave his old toys away, right? So once again, you can do this. Ways to involve your family is by having family meetings. Holding regular family meetings to discuss charitable goals could be really great. Involving your children in selecting the charities is an awesome. I have a friend, they do this over Thanksgiving, right? Part of their Thanksgiving celebration is thinking about what are the charities that they're going to give to collectively or individually. Second, practicing educational like activities. So going on a learning journey and encouraging you or your partner and to talk about and go and research and come back and report what you learned about these charitable organizations that you're thinking about giving to. And then two is to collaborate, working collaboratively on giving projects where the whole family contributes to one common cause. That is such an amazing way that you can start to think about engaging your family, right? And then celebrate it, make it a ceremony. And some, like I said, a friend of mine did this every Thanksgiving. You can choose another sort of important, significant holiday. Maybe it's the birth of a parent or the death of a parent, or just something of significance where you start to make it a tradition, right? So now I'm going to get into some practical and tactical tips for what you can do. So tip number one for maximizing the impact of your fund. Once again, regularly review and update your giving plan. It's important to regularly review and update your giving plan to ensure that it is in line with your goals and your values. So schedule an annual review to assess your progress and make adjustments as needed. Once again, if you're working with a wealth advisor, this might be part and parcel as part of your annual meeting with them. Two, stay informed about the charities you support. A great way to do that is to sign up for their newsletter, attend some of their events, read their annual report. They're mandated by the government, by the IRS, to issue an annual report. So read it, actually read the report and see what your dollars have helped to create. Then leverage your expertise of your donor advised provider. So leveraging the services that are available to you at the host organization could be such an immense help to you, especially if you're new to this. Next, keep on doing research and further learning. Education, education, education is a key. There's lots of great books out here. There's Giving 2.0, Transforming Your Giving and Our World by Laura Arriaga Andreessen. There's also The Art of Giving, where the soul meets a business plan. That's by Jeffrey Solomon and Charles Bruffman. There's some websites I already talked to you about, like the National Philanthropic Trust, Catholic Charities, and others. Once again, attend workshops and courses. There's some great stuff on YouTube. There's your local philanthropic organization generally will offer different kinds of events, webcasts, and things like that you can attend, information sessions about trends that are happening in giving, concerns that are happening about giving, legal impacts or legislative impacts to giving. And so you can keep abreast of like what's happening in the giving world that way. Definitely most states have a council on foundations and a council on nonprofits. Those are really great. Sign up for their newsletters to find out kind of what's happening in the philanthropic space. So here is my call to action. Take the first step by reviewing your current charitable giving and considering how donor advised funds could enhance your impact. Start researching donor advised providers, check out different websites, but get started. I hope that this has been helpful. So I want to thank you for joining us on this journey to maximize your financial impact of your charitable giving using donor advised funds. Today, we talked about what they are, how they work, and how you can get your donor advised funds set up and the incredible benefits that they offer. So join me in the next episode or next week when I show you how to do different better. Let me know what you think of the show. We love comments, so tell us how this show has helped you. And if there's a money or finance question you have, or if there's someone you want me to interview, hit me up on LinkedIn or Instagram. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and follow us on our socials. Until next time.